Okay, well, thanks for the invitation to come here and to share a few of the things we see in Belgium and we've experienced in Belgium over the years. I think you will see some similarities with already what was mentioned earlier on. So what I'm going to talk about is there's a long ongoing research agenda on retirement, early retirement in the University of Liège, and so we have a series of papers on that. And so the broad idea of the talk is really to look a bit at this, at the role of incentives on the retirement decision, and that within the context actually of a very complicated system and a very highly interacting system. And so I will just show you some things on that. So before, just a quick outline. So first some background on Belgium, because otherwise I think you will not understand where the complication comes from. Second, just some thoughts on disability and health status, and then also some more analysis on the labor market, so the retirement decision and so on. So background on Belgium, just to give you a sense of the complication. So it's let's put it a diverse country. It's also an immigration country. It's a country with multi-layer governments, and some of these governments are actually at the same level, hierarchically speaking. And so, broadly speaking, you have a federal government that is losing competences all of the time, and you have then a second layer of government, which is regions and language communities that don't perfectly overlap. So you have 3 language communities. The 2 first ones don't like each other so much. The third one, it's okay, it's tolerated by the other ones. Then you have economic regions, which are to a large degree overlapping but not fully. And so you have competencies that are split amongst the different levels of government. So social insurance is so far by and large still a federal matter, but it's less and less so. So for example, in the field of health and in personal related services, it's the language communities that are competent, whereas for employment matters, it's the regions that are competent for job placement and so on. So you see that it's actually a very complicated system where you have actually multiple levels of government intervening, and that combined with a system which has evolved over a long period of time. So we have had a social insurance system for many years, and so what you have is a system where many levels of government are involved, but also because of a search for compromise over the years, you have had lots of interventions of private actors alongside the public ones, and so what we end up with is a system with long list of risks that are insured under social insurance, but also an extremely complicated landscape where you have many actors intervening. Just to give you one example, unemployment insurance, which is particularly important in Belgium. So unemployment insurance, the federal government is officially paying you, is responsible for paying, for financing the unemployment insurance. It's actually the federal government that pays money to the trade unions who pay the people who are unemployed. And for getting you out of unemployment, it's actually the regions that are in charge of it to get you out of it, but they have no benefit for doing so. And so in some sense, you have quite some incentive issues going on. So just...
Sounds like it could move right here.
Exactly, yeah. It's kind of like, that's why I was saying, it's very, it's very similar, and I think there are some other similarities, as you will see. There are 3 main retirement systems, which are 3 main statuses. One of them is the wage earner, the private sector wage earner, contractual wage earner scheme, the civil servant scheme, and the self-employed scheme. In terms of generosity, the self-employed scheme is the least interesting. In terms of other characteristics, it shares them with the wage earner scheme, which essentially is comparable to what was also mentioned earlier on here. There is a full retirement age, which is, let's say, 65 or something resembling a full retirement age at 65. At that age, in these 2 schemes, self-employed and wage earner, you lose your employment protection. And so before that, you're protected. After that, you're not. But you can continue to work. And then there is the 3rd scheme, which is the civil servant scheme, where there it's not an option to work beyond retirement. At 65, you're kicked out at the latest. That's it. And so it's, these are the 3 main systems. And in addition to these 3, let's say, insurance-based systems, even though it's a stretch for civil servants because there's no contribution that is paid for them. It's, let's say, beyond these three systems, there is a social assistance system which is quite generous, so paying quite generous means-tested social assistance benefits to old people, beyond actually the social assistance for younger people. One of the outcomes of this whole complicated institutional setting is that by international standards, Belgians are amongst the champions of early retirement, meaning that amongst those 50 plus, we have very low activity rate. And that very low activity rate also translates into a very low effective retirement age, which at some point was, went down to 57. Now it moved up again a little bit. But it moved up not because there has been any explicit policy decision. It moved rather up, like in many other countries, where it just simply trended up in the 2000s, in the particular late 2000s, without really having done any reforms. So out of this, the system here is just a graph that compares a few countries. You see that Belgium is the blue one at the bottom there. Belgium has actually very low participation rate, low employment rate, low participation rate. And that starts actually, as compared to many other countries, quite early. So you have quite a big opening into early retirement at age 50 already. And so the common way of doing that is actually through two main programs at 50, which is one of them is old age unemployment. And old age unemployment is something like an improved version of unemployment insurance. So what is the improvement? Well, it's not that it's, both are not time limited. So actually in Belgium, you can be on unemployment insurance for forever if you want to. You can leave school actually and get unemployment benefits without ever having worked. You can get benefits. And so it's not that. What is the sweetener for old age unemployment is that you have a somewhat higher replacement rate, and you have less strict controls on your availability for the labor force. When you look over time, there again, in terms of just to give you an idea of what the situation is, you see that here this is like the labor force participation on the left for men, on the right for women. And you see that the labor force participation rate for Belgians, let's say, in their prime age between 40, 45, something like this, well, there it's like high. It's quite high. It's comparable or even beyond some other countries. But then very quickly, as you reach age 50, the participation rate drops down quite rapidly for men and really reaches extremely low levels, 60, 64. And for women, it's an upward trend, but that's a general upward trend just simply because more women are participating in the labor force. So it's not really that there is anything, any different system applicable for them. So now, where does the interest also of the Belgian system come from? Well, one of the interesting features is that within each one of these regimes, it's not a succession of openings that you have into retirement. It's actually at many points in time, you have many of these openings that you could possibly try to target. So, for example, if you are, let's say, 50 years old and you would like to, or you are being pushed out of the labor force both ways, well, then, there are different programs that could possibly be interesting. And so one of these programs is early retirement within the pension system. So there is a window of opportunities, normal age, let's say 65. You can get out as early as 60 for wage earners. For some categories of civil servants, such as school teachers, primary school teachers, not university teachers, primary and secondary school teachers, they could get out at 55. So they can go out earlier because it's a physically and mentally exhausting job. And so that's in the civil servant system, but in the regular, let's say in the private sector system, it's essentially 60, 65, so that's the window that you have. But from the average effective retirement age, you can see that that's not the window that most people use. What most people do is actually they retire early outside of the pension system. And outside of the pension system, so there is, first of all, what I said, the aged unemployment system, where, when you are put out of the job by your employer, well, then, if you qualify for this old age unemployment system, then you can get these benefits until you actually do retire in the regular retirement system. And second possibility is there is the regular unemployment insurance, obviously, because there under regular unemployment insurance you can just lose your job, and then subject to job search criteria and so on, you can get these benefits. And then there is a third exit option, which is early retirement benefits, which are organized outside of the pension system. Essentially, what these early retirement options are composed of, it's people get unemployment insurance money or something looking very much like it, paid for by the Unemployment Insurance Administration. And in addition, your company pays you a supplement. So it's an explicit arrangement where the company strikes a deal with the workers' representatives and the government to say, like, well, we will put out so and so many people, and they will be entitled to this program. And this conventional early retirement, it's a convention, so it's a deal between the three parties involved. And so, just to give you one example, the most recent big case of conventional early retirement, really quite a big one, was when Opel closed its Antwerp factory. So what was done was that massive amounts of people were shifted into that program. So the government pays essentially unemployment benefits, plus the company then pays the supplement. And so these are the official kind of, like, these are the routes, plus there's disability insurance. Okay, and so disability insurance in the past was very often seen as a rather small program in Belgium and rather well tested. But actually, part of what we've done is to look at it. Just to give you some more ideas, in terms of the way the whole system evolved, it evolved indeed according to this philosophy of freeing up spaces for the young people, given the fixed lump of labor. And contrary to what was said earlier on, the idea is not completely dead. So actually, quite a few people still have that idea, and we also did some work on that, and also found that there is no real support for it. But in terms of like this idea, it's still out there, and so right now there are still these programs are all still there, and in 2002, for example, there was a reform that tried to tighten the criteria, for example, for the old age unemployment. And a little bit later, in 2005, there was another attempt to actually tighten criteria at that time for early retirement programs outside of the pension system. But actually, if you want to sum it up, there's very little effect. There's very little effect. And so now, pension reform 2012, the new government that we finally got after some 18 months of negotiations. What did the government come up with? Well, essentially, new reform program, and one of them is to make pensions less generous for the public sector. That's actually a thing that is implemented. And then secondly, they are going to make eligibility criteria again tighter for early retirement. Now the question is whether they will succeed, and you will get some sense of that in a second. And then the third thing that they want to do is to attack one very big problem in our system, which is that all these periods that you spend on these social insurance programs are credited fully towards your pension record, meaning there's nobody paying any contributions, but they count. So, for example, suppose you retire at age 50 and the old age unemployment, the disability, or the early retirement program, it doesn't matter which one of them, all these years from 50 till 65 are assimilated to work. They are assimilated to work, and they are assimilated to work at the last wage you had. So actually, it's like constant real. It's like a constant real wage level that is imputed into the earnings history. And when you have people leaving at 50, for example, you have 15 years out of this, person's career that are purely imputed and not effectively worked years. Actually, there was a study last year done by the Pensions Administration that came up with something like 25% of all days that count towards pensions are assimilated days and not work days. So it means that it's a massive phenomenon in the system that we have there. So in the sum, when you have these systems, you have two big questions. So one question that I think is interesting: are all these programs communicating vessels? So meaning, is there a flow between the programs? why did, for example, these other programs not work, these reforms of the early entitlements? And secondly, what is the role of financial incentives on that? So what we have done here with some co-authors recently is to use the labor force survey and also the share data, so the Survey of Health, Age and Retirement in Europe data, to try to get some idea of what is going on in the facts. And so when we look at the exit rates, of men, I mean, there's not much interesting that you can see here in aggregate. When you look at the more detailed, when you look at the more detailed breakdown of exit causes, what is the main cause of your exit at the different in the different age bracket, for example, here 50, 64, and by system. So, for example, disability, early retirement, and so on. What we see is that overall, when we look at this labor force survey data, which does not give us the full richness of the administrative data, we see that actually disability insurance does not seem to be such a big deal because, people just don't mention it that often, as being the main cause for their exit. So what we see more going on there is that actually the big issues are early retirement. Now, does this mean that DI is not an important program for retirement in Belgium? Well, actually, here is a different statistic, this time from administrative data. And this one here shows you the number of people that receive benefits in a given age bracket. So, for example, this is the age bracket 50-64, and so it looks at the number of people getting benefits in the different systems. So the bottom one is disability. The second one is this conventional early retirement. You see that this conventional early retirement is a big program, where the government strikes this deal with the employer and the trade unions to get people out of the work. And the topmost one is old age unemployment. And what you see here in this graph already is something that is also verified elsewhere, which is that the moment in 2003, 2004, 2005, when the old age unemployment system was tightened, actually what you see is indeed the topmost part is shrinking a bit in terms of numbers. But what you see is that the second one from the top is getting bigger. And so what you see, the second one from the top, what is that? Well, that's just the regular unemployment system. So meaning that if you tighten one system, for example, here in that case, the old age unemployment system, you will pretty much automatically find these people back in another system. And so it's like this communicating vessels issue, which is really a big problem in the Belgian retirement landscape. So tighten unemployment insurance, the old age unemployment insurance, and you will find them in the unemployment insurance. Now, what you would have to do almost is to then go on and check also in the unemployment insurance. But there you have all these levels of government involved and all the different actors, and so it's not that easy. What you see also for women is another trend, which is that disability insurance seems to be getting bigger in numbers. That's linked, obviously, partially to the fact that women start to work longer and also more, so that people are more participating. But actually, the most recent data we have from administrative sources shows us that this increase in female disability enrollment is much stronger than anything you can explain by increased labor force participation and lengthened careers that are a requirement for getting these disability benefits. Actually, what we see is something maybe a bit different from what was told to us this morning by the first speaker, namely that disability insurance is strongly growing, but not only for blue-collar workers. Disability insurance is not only an exit route for blue-collar workers, but actually we see two trends. One of them is we see, I will take this graph just for a second here, this is the composition of exits, the reasons why people exit. So what is the reason why you exit, the main reason why you exit through disability? Well, the first black one is the circulatory diseases, or problems. The second one is musculoskeletal problems. And this one in the middle that is getting bigger, that's actually mental health problems. And so what we see here is, again, for men and for women, there seems to be a shift actually in the population. So even if the numbers, for example, of people in the system are relatively flat, the composition of the population is quite different. It's changing over time. So there's a heavy trend towards more mental problems and less physical problems. Now, when you break that data down a bit further by sex and by blue collar, white collar, you find actually some more interesting stuff, namely that it is disproportionately many women that actually suffer from mental problems, and actually disproportionately many white collar women who are getting into these systems. So what?
That's his opinion, not ours.
They admit it.
No, but it's like it's not admit, but this year's not. This year's actually the official diagnosis is administrative data. Yeah. Yeah, but it's like for men, actually what you see is that for men, white-collar workers, the number of disabled is also not growing so much. Actually, for men, white-collar workers, they would probably rather find themselves in a different early retirement program rather than disability. So for men, it's really the blue-collar workers that have a strong increasing trend. And there, it is actually now, in the last 2 or 3 years, this year goes till 2009, what we see is that for men, actually, blue-collar men, it's getting bigger again, the exit route, okay? So, just to give you another show on this, when you look then at labor market reforms, do we find the fact that, for example, when we tighten the criteria for some program, let's say for retirement, do we find more people in disability? If we tighten the criteria for early retirement, do we find more people in disability? Well, the answer here is over this period, we have had a few changes in the early retirement entitlements, and disability insurance rates have not really reacted in a remarkable way. So in a way, what we see is that disability insurance has its trend, which is going on, and actually it is a heavy trend that is going on in the background. But it's not really reacting in the short run. It's not absorbing the shock. It's not the big shock absorber. What is the shock absorber in the system is really the unemployment insurance system. That is a big shock absorber. And so as soon as we have a major change in the system, unemployment insurance does react pretty much immediately to that change. And so either loses significant numbers of people or takes them in pretty much immediately. So in a way, what we see is that, yes, we have some communicating vessels issue going on. And right now it looks that the one that is absorbing the most is actually the unemployment insurance, just simply because it's probably the least checked one. It's the least, it has the lowest resistance level to get in. Disability insurance is taking up increasing numbers of people. And actually, when you look at the numbers of women, for example, who are entering the disability roles, when you see the overall numbers of women that are disabled as compared to men, these numbers of women are now outweighing the ones for men. So actually there is something more than just demographics going on. There's definitely more of an entry issue there. And one of the possible reasons is that for disability insurance, the career requirements are not as strict as, for example, for early retirement programs. And so you can really see that, it's for men, it's one program, for women, it's another program that is playing more of this role. At the same time, given that the changes for women are not so brutal, they were phased in. For example, the increase in the normal retirement age for women was phased in. So therefore, we see also more of a smooth increase in that trend. Just to give you one, also, I think it's a nice illustration of that. When you compare Belgium and the Netherlands over the last, let's say, 10 years roughly, what you see there is, Belgium and the Netherlands start from very different levels. The Netherlands has a very huge population, or had a rather huge population of disabled people, and as compared to Belgium. When you see also the numbers of people, the population of the Netherlands is maybe 40% bigger than the one of Belgium, but not more. And the numbers of disabled here that we see on the graph, so Belgium is the topmost one, Netherlands is the bottommost one, is still different. But what is, I think, interesting is when you put it, like index it a bit and see the time trend in these two series, you see that actually in Belgium, the trend is clearly an increase. It's just going on and on and on, and it's continuously on, even with these different changes that we've seen in the social insurance landscape. And why is it going down in the Netherlands? Well, after the first period, they also did partial reforms where they only reformed one segment, namely disability insurance. Well, what they observed is that people ultimately just simply switched into another system or reclassified under a different disability label, let's put it this way. And so therefore, what you see here from this is that only coordinated actions will work, and so these partial reforms to one segment of the system will not really work. And I think that's something that you cannot necessarily see in all countries, just simply because in some other countries, these special dedicated social insurance programs are much more screened and much more targeted towards a special population. Here, it's more like originally an unemployment insurance program, which has evolved into something like a multi-purpose kind of program. And so, last aspect I wanted to show you is in terms of what we then did in empirical work recently is to look at the share data to see whether financial incentives play out for people and actually make them work earlier or later. And so what we do here in this approach is to look at the incentives that people face in the different systems. So here, this is just a descriptive statistics of exit ages in the data, and you see that the exit probabilities, the instantaneous exit probabilities are quite high at the early exit age of 59, 60, and then again like around 63. This this huge one at the end is just simply because everybody is pretty much out then. So you see that there is only one person essentially involved in this, and so it's not really very interesting, this last probability. So essentially everybody's already out of the labor market when he reaches age 65. When you look at the weights, what are the important weights for exiting? Well, you see that in the, again, share is self-reported. When you look at the reasons for exit, people would quote disability actually quite often, and disproportionately more than what we see in the other data. So what you see here is that, well, actually the three systems matter, and particularly in this age group 55-59, which is in some sense the one where the most action is going on, you see that actually all three systems matter. And so in our incentive calculation, what we do is we take a weighted average of the different programs, because we don't know who is specifically eligible for each one of these programs. And given that everybody has a certain probability to actually become unemployed or to become disabled, so we weight these incentives that you have to go into the different pathways. And so what we do is we stick this information, this incentive information, into an option value model like in Stock and Wise, where we then try to estimate, well, what is the, the probability. Essentially, the option value is the option of waiting, the option of continuing to work, so versus retiring. And so we use this indicator of option value in a probit model to estimate the incentive of people to leave the labor force. This here is just a quick graph of these options, but it's not really important. And here, don't worry, we'll not go through all the data. The only one point I want to just point out two things. One is we have tried a whole series of techniques, of sticking in different covariates and so on. One thing that is constant is that this option value has a strong negative impact on retirement decisions. So what is that? It means just simply that if the system gives you a big incentive to wait, essentially people will wait. This is like the interpretation that you can roughly do on this. What we also included is some health indicator, and just give me 1 minute exactly to a fine. Health indicator, and these health indicators, what you see is that actually they don't seem to play necessarily for every group with the same strength, but overall it means that if you have good health, it means that you will also retire later, which makes quite some sense. So essentially, better health means you retire later, because you also probably by waiting you can benefit more from this annuity aspect of the social insurance system. So just to wrap up, what are the two main points that I discussed here? One of them is financial incentives seem to matter quite some. actually we did similar research on some administrative data before, and we also found that there was a strong effect of these financial incentive indicators on retirement. So what we found there, and also what we confirmed here with this new data, is that really financial incentives at the micro level, at the individual level, seem to play out quite some. What it also means is that if you want to make people actually work longer, so if you want to increase the retirement age, what was mentioned earlier on, well, it's actually not the official retirement age that needs to be attacked, but really it's this effective early one. And to get this effective early one to work, you actually need to have like all programs that are open, that that need to be part of the game. So, for example, having a pension reform which only targets the early retirement provisions of the official early retirement scheme will almost necessarily fail, because there are these other options. So in a way, to get this thing to work, to get people to work longer, you actually need to have a comprehensive approach, which then again means you need to test much more strictly what it means to be disabled, what are the requirements for disability benefits. So for example, what was mentioned this morning, is it your current job, is it an equal job, or is it whichever job? So it's like all these issues need to be much stricter controlled, and so it's much harder than some people would think, by, it's not by passing a law that will increase the retirement age from 65 to 67, or like the statistic that the OECD also uses, half the countries have like an age of 65. I think it was 14 who have an age 67 to 69 in a few years' time. Well, actually, that is not sufficient. You really need to get the early entitlement phase adjusted, and there the actuarial adjustments will need to be severe. And so the wider the window of opportunity, take here the case of Belgium, it's a 15 years window of opportunity. It means actually actuarial adjustments would have to be almost draconian. So you would, if you calculate it out, you would have to, which I once did, you have to cut benefits down by something like 85% to make it actuarially neutral between 50 and 65. So this is just as a concluding thought. Thanks.
Thank you. So I guess that